9 minutes. Mr Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I move the amendment in my name. I'm pleased to open this debate on behalf of the Scottish Conservatives, though it of course is disappointing that this government has chosen to waste Parliament time by debating today's farcical motion. However, this is not the first time this has happened this year, Presiding Officer. It was only 2 weeks ago that the Parliament was debating hypothetical social security powers in a hypothetical independent Scotland. Anyone viewing today's proceedings could be forgiven for thinking that the Scottish Parliament TV has started showing repeats. In light of the motion that has been presented to Parliament today, I'll take some time before I come to Mr Green at this stage, so maybe later. My amendment calls for this government to put up and in continuous grandstanding, and it continues to do that, Presiding Officer, the continuous grandstanding based on constitutional grievances, where we have been and we are again today. It calls for them to stop engineering this farcical politics based on non-existent powers for a non-existent future. Instead, my amendment calls for the Scottish Government to focus on the powers this government has already, Presiding Officer. Powers to fix Scotland's NHS and to restore our once world-leading education system. These are the priorities that many people in Scotland wish to see. They do not wish to see debates of this nature continuing. However, all of us are often appear that we are the interests of the individuals within the power. You need only take a look at today's motion for evidence of that. The government's motion attempts to speak about the interests of the Scottish people. It is a shame that this government appears to have no idea what the interests really are, Presiding Officer. I would hazard a guess that there are many few people outside who are concerned about Scottish independence at this moment in time. But they are concerned, for example, about our schools and how they are performing. And when it comes to Scotland's schools, it's hardly surprising that the SNP would rather talk about their constitutional than wish list, than indeed dealing with the direct issues that affect. For example, this year, it's opportunist for them to do this today, because they don't want to talk about the record low PISA scores. They don't want to talk about the continued violence against teachers in our classrooms, or the continued failure to close the attainment gap between Scottish richest and poorest pupils. These are all situations and circumstances that should be being discussed in this Parliament, and we should all be focusing on them, not on the ideas and the possibilities of things happening in the future, when the reality is that people across this country do not wish to see that. Even with the subject today, Scotland's place in the world, the SNP are not interested in having an honest debate. International relations are a matter that is very much reserved to the United Kingdom Government, and the Scottish Government know that. Scotland's place in the world is best served by working constructively within the framework, rather than continually wishing that framework did not exist. The UK is the 5th largest contributor for foreign aid in the world and was a founding member of the United Nations, Presiding Officer. It can truly be proud of its reputation on the world stage, because many countries have and still do receive international development projects. And across the globe, the United Kingdom has done massive work to support, to secure and to be involved with many of these organisations. And they recognise the strength of the United Kingdom. It's just a problem, and it's a possibility, and it's a shame that the Scottish Government do not. As part of the UK, Scotland is a key player in one of the most influential countries in the world, both economically and culturally. Yep. Seemingly, all of this is something that the SNP would rather leave behind, Presiding Officer. They wish to leave that behind. We have heard today from the Cabinet Secretary, who has tried to convince us that an independent Scotland would have more influence on the world stage, not less. Fantasy politics indeed, Presiding Officer. The truth is that maximising Scotland's place in the world depends on the SNP working constructively with our counterparts in the United Kingdom. Of course.
Cabinet Secretary.
A majority of MSPs in this chamber wish to see an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. and a majority of members of Parliament from Scotland at Westminster wish to see an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. What's the UK Government done to deliver on the views of this Parliament or the majority of our parliamentarians?
Alexander Stewart.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his intervention. There are many views, Cabinet Secretary, and the situation is dire. We have to admit that. I want to see a resolution to things progressing, and I want to see a two-state situation in that part of the world, and that is trying to be achieved. Even today, there are discussions taking place in other parts of the Middle East to try and create a ceasefire, and I look forward to that day happening in the future. Yeah. Given the approach today that Scotland's government is to debate, and as I've said, we are attempting today to try and cloud the situation and overcast to show that, as I say, Scotland would be better on its own, when indeed we know the financial broad shoulders of the United Kingdom ensure that we have a stable and a responsible and appropriately managed situation here with the United Kingdom. Indeed, the government's idea they've talked about today is yet again another tax-funded independence brochure. Scotland's place in the world is the 11th time in the last 2 years alone that the SNP have chosen to scandalously waste the time of civil servants and money on the Scottish taxpayer, who are paying for this. And in reality, it's unbelievable that we are putting all that time, effort and money into something that's hypothetical. And, as I say, the people in Scotland do not wish to see. The paper talks about the importance of security, well-being and prosperity, despite the fact that none of these things have even the slightest thing to do with Scottish independence. Presiding Officer, the SNP government are clearly willing to continue the same old narrative week after week.
Mr Stewart, could you resume your seat? Mr Hoy, Mr Kerr, I have tried to make clear to you that I do not want to hear separate conversations going on across the chamber, however much they might be incited. Okay? Please, dignity and respect to the person who has the floor, which is your own colleague, Alexander Stewart. You can get the time back.
Officer, the SNP government are clearly willing to continue the same old narrative week after week. Such an approach is indeed within their gift, and we know they can do that, and they choose to do that. However, these benches will continue to call out this government's abandonment of their duties and the abandonment of the communities that we represent. So, in conclusion, Presiding Officer, it is time for this government to end the grandstanding, to end the manufactured grievance, to start using their powers to work towards delivering the Scotland the public really want, and the priorities of the public and what they require. That is what our communities want, and that is what our constituents want. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Stewart. I now call on